Hi, and thanks for joining for Fulfilling Career Happy Life. This season, we are joining for a seat at the table different executives in corporate America. And today, I am thrilled to have with me someone who is an old friend and someone I respect tremendously, Mike Petroutsas. Mike and I actually worked together back longer ago than either one of us probably want to admit, Mike, but we've both had taken very different journeys since then. Mike has a really impressive background in the commercial space, and particularly in pharma, taking on sales leadership roles, marketing leadership roles, running business units both in the US and globally, mostly in the specialty and then oncology space. And now he is the president and head of commercial at Astellas Pharma US. So thrilled to have you here, Mike. I just want to say, because when I was thinking about why was I so excited to have you on the show and share your perspective, one of the things that I think about you, and this is how I describe you as a leader, is that you have very broad commercial experience. You're very confident in yourself and your team. You do an excellent job of setting expectations and giving your team space while holding them accountable. And I think you may do that better than anybody I've ever seen in action. And I'm just excited to have you here and excited to talk to you today, Mike.
Thanks, Randy. Look, first of all, it's great to see you as always. I feel like it's an honor to be here because you mentioned briefly that we worked together. I worked for you. And I hope that a lot of what I put to practice today is a lot of what I've learned from you. So it's truly an honor and really a special opportunity to be here with you today. So thank
Thank
you.
you. Well, actually, that brings up an interesting point because the whole reason that I'm doing this series is to help people that are coming up behind us and some of the things that we wish, we had known and what would be helpful to think about. And so one of the things you just said is funny. Yeah, okay, there was a time I was your boss. Now, the last couple of years, we've been in a position where you've hired me to help work with your teams in different ways. So that goes to the point of your network, right? How it works well for you, and the people coming up, the right people stay in your network, and who knows how you can help each other in different ways throughout the career. So, okay. So let me start with a big question, which is looking back over your career, what strikes you as the biggest challenge you took on?
Wow, so many of them. I would say, one of the biggest challenges I've had in my career, because you kind of kicked off with sharing a little bit about my background and having confidence. I think the lack of confidence early in my career was probably the biggest challenge. I think it helped shape how I went about building the different stepping stones in my career. But I think I came into this country in the late '80s to go to college, right? The last 2 years of high school, and I really think early in my career, just as you're settling to try to find out what you want to do when you grow up, coming into a country where English is your second language, you don't feel as articulate as you should be. That takes away from your confidence. I went to pharmacy school, so that served me well when I went into sales, being able to articulate our value proposition. But as I moved up, right, I didn't have a business background. That also took away from my confidence. So that was a big barrier. And I think what I did to overcompensate at the time was just work harder. I thought if I could just work hard, I will sort of supplement what I perceive to be gaps. And I think that confidence build over time. So I think we can't really discount sort of your personal and emotional state versus, work challenges we can certainly talk about.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I see. I don't have that experience of, coming here, learning, speaking a second language and communicating in that way. So it's, it really is quite something. If you think back, like feeling that a lack of confidence early on because of communications and different environment, culture, different things.
Well, social network too, right? You don't have as many friends. You
Yeah.
feel like you're on the outside looking in, and you always have to sort of penetrate an environment. So you're looking for different ways to learn to both adapt to the environment, but also coping mechanisms, right? On how do
Yeah.
you build your confidence?
So thinking back on that, like you said, your way of coping with that lack of confidence was to work harder and, build it and that kind of thing. Thinking back on it now, like what would you tell your younger self? Is working harder the answer, or is there something you think you could have done differently?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I often self-reflect now as I have a lot of different discussions with people, and first thing I would say from a personal perspective is just stop and smell the roses. As many times where you're working hard for your career, you're not realizing, life can pass you by. So, first piece of advice I would say, the incremental value of 10 hours extra a week probably wouldn't be worth what I thought it was at the time. So, just appreciate the moments and the people that are important to you as you're going through this journey. I think the second thing I would probably do a little bit differently is build a stronger relationship with mentors, champions, and supporters. I thought I had to do it all alone, and I probably wasn't getting good advice. So I know you've been a great mentor to many, including myself, in different stages of my career, but just finding people I can trust that can sort of help me through this journey without thinking I could have done it all on my own.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It occurs to me that at that stage in our career, if we're feeling a lack of confidence, that may be the very hardest time to reach out and seek mentorship. So if we flip that on the other side to folks who are more mature, I'll call it, in our careers, it makes it even that much more important for us to reach out to others who may not be, to see if they're receptive in that rather than it's hard for them to ask at the time they may need it the most.
Absolutely. I thought we were just talking about this where I had an old colleague that I work with that just took upon a new role. You obviously have the pleasure today of using LinkedIn and finding out how people's careers are progressing. And I reached out to them and I said, hey, this is a tough job. I'm here for you if you want to talk about it. I did something similar, not for any other reason outside of thinking they may not be comfortable in reaching out to me or others. And that's a sort of a shortcoming that I had. So I'm trying to definitely pay it forward for sure.
Mhm. It's interesting because I remember, when I got to the VP level and whatever, I was always very conscious to send LinkedIn connections to people in the organization. Like when I met with them, when I thought about it, because they might, even a simple thing like sending someone up the chain a LinkedIn invitation, they don't feel necessarily comfortable doing it. It's interesting.
Yeah, I'll tell you a funny thing about LinkedIn and confidence. Early in my career, I normally never send an update when I move a role on LinkedIn, only because early in my career, I had sort of a little bit of an imposter syndrome where I was working hard, getting promoted. I just didn't want people to see where I was going and what I was doing because I just didn't have confidence in it. So that little button that you press that says update your network, I never pressed it once.
So, what advice do you give people who may express that to you now?
I think the first thing I share with people is, early in your career, you think IQ is valuable, and then later on, you realize that EQ, self-awareness, becomes more of a premium, and just asking them to self-reflect and understand that being vulnerable will probably get you a lot further in your career. And that may mean if you're vulnerable that you, number one, make mistake or overshare. But the reality is that people will appreciate it. People do want to help you.
It's
And,
true.
and if something comes up that your vulnerability is compromised and you feel you shouldn't have done it, you'll learn from it. You get stronger.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because obviously in my work as an executive coach, and I certainly have these moments, people will talk to me about, oh, I should have done this, or, the cringe moments. And I
Yeah.
guarantee you, nobody is thinking about it as much as we are. So, like, we make it bigger in our heads many times than it is.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Thinking back, Mike, is there anything that you feel now, something that you did or maybe didn't do that you recognize now as, wow, I was getting in my own way?
Yeah, I had a very linear thinking of development, meaning that, you do a job and you take a job that's incrementally a little bit harder so you can build on what you've learned and you put yourself less at risk, but also in a higher probability of success in the next role. What I've learned is just taking risk early is probably the most important thing. And I learned that I when we worked for a company together, and I remember the head of commercial operations put me to run incentives. I mean, I was in sales and marketing and what do I know about incentives? And it scared the what out of me. I
Yeah, I mean, that's an important function.
it's an important function, but I'm not a forecaster. I'm not an analyst. I don't know how to run CRM or platforms, right? Market research was in that group later on. And it scared me. And I remember her telling me, like, look, you're at that stage of your career. You need to get really uncomfortable. And if you can do this, you'll stretch and you'll take it as a learning. And if you can't, hey, maybe you're not as good as you think you are. So, and I wasn't. I was, no one's as good as they think they are. But it was a good opportunity back then. And the first thing I learned from that experience is, number one, take risks, get really, really uncomfortable, and then two, trust people. You don't need to be a subject matter expert in forecasting and reporting and all of that stuff. You have other really smart people, smarter than you doing that. You just have to lead them through it and remove barriers and create an environment where they can be great. Those are kind of the things that I learned through that process of risk taking for sure.
Yeah, that's that's really helpful. Thank you for sharing that. You know, it's interesting because what you're saying of taking on something that you hadn't done before and that discomfort, and you got some great advice of get uncomfortable. And I am a huge believer in not just, you know, we have our comfort zone and then there's that discomfort area and then there's growth. And you got to get through the discomfort to get to growth. And when you can get to the point of, wow, this feels so uncomfortable, bring it on. This is great. Like that's when you can really fuel your growth. It's so exciting to watch people come to that realization.
Yeah, and it's also something that you could look back on and reflect on because you're going to want to be uncomfortable again. And it's sort of like I tell people, I was always nervous presenting early in my career. Still nervous, right? You get in front of a group of people, and you want to share either a strategy, a vision, or something. And it's for me naturally something that I'm not comfortable doing. And then the more you do it, the more you have experiences, reflect back and say, okay, I've done this before, and it helps build that momentum and confidence.
Mhm.
Same way with getting uncomfortable. I look back on it now and say, hey, if I got out of that situation successful and I build a certain way of learning and trusting myself and also understanding how I can build different skill sets and capabilities, I can do different things. So it's almost like you build muscle memory by doing it as well.
Mhm. And I think one of the things that can be really helpful too is when things don't go according to plan. Like we've all had those situations. It could be something as basic as the fire alarm goes off or the power goes out. Or it could be you got that question you were fearing, or you froze at the moment and didn't have the insightful answer that you wanted, whatever it was. But you lived through it. And then it makes it less terrifying, something when something like that happens again, in my experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. We could talk about some of those. That would be the outtakes podcast. We talk about those situations.
Definitely.
Mike, what has surprised you about your career journey?
Um, there's that old adage when hard work meets opportunity. Uh, just luck. I've been very fortunate in my career with interactions with people I've had, and where I've said early, I've had to work really hard, and I've just been in the right place. Sometimes, you don't realize how dynamic our industry is with organizations merging, changing, growing, downsizing, and we're all impacted by these things. And I feel like a lot of the hard work I've put, opportunities always kind of come my way, and don't discount that. There's a lot of more hardworking people, smarter people than me that I know could have been equally as successful had they taken the right versus the left side of the fork.
Mhm.
With that, I consider it a blessing, but that's something that I'd be remiss not sharing with you for sure.
No, and I understand what you're saying because luck does play a role for all of us. But I mean, my perspective on go to what we can control. And I have a client that says she's quoting someone else, so I don't know who I should attribute this to. But the thing she says a lot is, okay, I'm going to increase the surface area of my luck. Meaning, I'm going to learn as much as I can. I'm going to make connections wherever I can. I'm going to pursue these opportunities. I'm going to make myself useful and help people just because that's the kind of business I want to run, whatever those things are. And she considers that increasing the surface area of her luck so that when the things come by, she catches them. And I love that way of thinking about it.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where I think the continuous learning curiosity piece comes in. Because hard work is one part of it, right? It's about the time, hour, and effort you put in, but you have to continually try to learn, which is part of that surface area, right? The mental piece of it.
Yeah.
And seeking continually of putting yourself in a position where you're building on new skills, right? So that's why I said it's not necessarily luck, it's hard work and opportunity. And in that hard work, I built confidence in saying, hey, when I saved enough money and I was in the right place, started taking educational courses, right, to learn about finance, learn about accounting, taking other courses, right, to learn a little bit more culture, right, in a country that I wasn't from, and getting that space. So absolutely, I think hard work is just a simple way of saying it. But I love that surface area piece. I'm going to
Yeah.
steal that.
Yeah, absolutely. When I find out who I should be quoting on that, I'll let you know. But it's interesting because you really walk your talk in that regard. I mean, you in your career had reached a level at or above what many people aspire to, and then you went back and got your MBA to do even more, and you have done even more. So you really do walk your talk in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, it's funny as I see folks that are thinking about retirement and they're thinking about what they can do. And I don't think we're all meant, I think you could always retire, right, after you've built a certain amount of savings. But I think people at our core are continuous learners. And once you stop working, stop contributing, stop learning, I think that takes away of who we are. And that's why I did it. And I'm also thinking about what am I going to do next, right? What's the next course? What's the next
Yeah.
place I'm going to learn? You do it through travel. I'm not a traveler. I don't like to fly as much as you do, and I do it when it's on the ground. But I think we're both curious in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's you invite it, you invite the learning and things like that. But one of the things that I was thinking about while you were talking about that is sort of thinking about the time spectrum, if you will, of our careers and the way we can take risks early on. And then once you've built your career, you get to a point you start thinking maybe about what else can I learn? What's the next challenge? What do I want my legacy to be? And at that phase, you can take risks again. If you've saved well, invested well, done all the things, you may have kids out of college. I recently had paid for the wedding, like all that stuff's behind me. So, and a couple of years ago, obviously, I dove out of corporate and started my own business. That was a big risk. But you can take risks at both ends of your career more easily. I didn't expect that until I got here.
No, and you always tend to surprise yourself. And congratulations on all the success you've had. It's funny, as recently someone asked me, what's the best advice you could give someone starting off their career? And it wasn't about work, it wasn't about education. I just said save the max in your 401k. There's that magic of compounding interest that I wish I would have known
Yeah,
probably about 30 years ago. Not until the first 5, 6, 7 years that I started thinking about that. And
yeah,
I tell my daughters today, just invest really early. I don't care what you do, it's the best thing you could do in your
yeah.
career.
No, it's so true. And I remember when I first got my first real job as a sales rep in pharma, I was making 21,000 a year and I thought I was big stuff, at a company car. And I remember sitting down with my dad and looking at the 401k stuff. I had no idea what it was. I had never taken business classes. I got my MBA later. And I remember him taking me through it and giving me that advice. And it has really served me well. Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, definitely.
Um, what do you wish you hadn't worried about?
Money for sure. We just talked about it. There's an element of paying off your student loans, fitting the ideal life of buying a house, in all the things that you think are important. And I did worry about it, and that's part of risk taking, right? You think to yourself, "Am I going to myself in a position where you compromise your ability to pay your bills, your student loans, your mortgage?" That's something that I think that looking back on it, if I had more confidence and thought things through a little differently, I would take in both a little bit more risk and enjoyed myself in that moment. So the financial thing I think is real, and we all have to plan for it,
Mhm.
especially as someone coming from a family of immigrants, right? Seeing your parents lose all of their financial being, right, and having to leave the country they were from. So I think that's a huge element for me. In terms of other things I wish I didn't have to worry about is I would probably say I did worry a lot about things I couldn't control, because you always say this. What is the pipeline of my company, and what's the next drug, and what's the future will look like? There's things that are good for you to understand and be aware of. And throughout my career, I wish I would have been telling myself, or maybe talking to you and saying, you can't control that. Focus on what you can control, and be the best you can, and enjoy those moments. So that's
Yeah.
probably the bigger learning.
I'm really glad you brought that up because I mean, you know how important that is to me in terms of focusing on what you can control. And that may be the single biggest stress reliever I've ever seen in clients and whatever. Because if you're worrying about stuff you can't control, you're just creating anxiety. There's nothing good that can come of that. In fact, it's funny. I just saw a movie over the weekend I had seen before, Bridge of Spies with Tom Hanks. I don't know if you've seen it.
Great movie, yeah.
Yeah, so there's this a couple of points at which the Russian spy that he's negotiating to get home, like he'll say, "Well, aren't you worried?" And the guy says to him, "Well, would it help?" It's like, wow, what a great perspective. Would it help? No, great, move on. So, pretty
Yeah.
extreme situation for him to learn the lesson, but I love the quote. Final question for you, Mike. Are there other leaders that you listen to podcasts, watch TED Talks, read their stuff? Like, where do you get your leadership inspiration?
Wow. I would say I've been fortunate enough to have so many diverse leaders. I would say I probably try to take bits and pieces of people individually, not necessarily one. I definitely learned over time we're all flawed in some way. No one's perfect, so it's hard to role model one individual.
But
But
there's a
all kidding
lot to be
aside,
learned from that too.
yeah, of course. And you always learn from it. But I do realize we work in a very diverse world, and whether it's thought, race, or gender, we need to be open to understanding and putting ourselves in other shoes. And the only way you can do that is if you take different perspectives from different people. I've worked for very conscientious leaders. I've worked for very results, performance-driven leaders. I've worked for high, open, vulnerable leaders, and you learn from them. And I think the key is to take different pieces of their style and apply it to how you can do it in an authentic way and better your team because our teams are not homogeneous, right? So I think that's probably the bigger piece that I've tried to take from it.
That's great. I mean, you're fortunate to have been surrounded with those kinds of leaders, but I think you're onto something really important, which is nobody is perfect. And people, really strong leaders have many areas that they're very strong and are aware of the areas where they aren't and bring in people on their team or somehow compensate for those areas and fill things out that way. So that's a great way to look at it. And you're
And I would
mentioning,
also say, yeah,
please.
sorry. I would also say, I tell my daughters now as they're going through their professional journey, everyone has a superpower. Uh, you look at a leader and you can take pros and cons from what they do, but focus on their strengths and understanding what their superpower is and seeing how they can apply it. And then that will teach you how to find other superpowers because I'm a huge believer in building from what makes us good and our strengths versus focusing on how we can improve our weaknesses.
I agree. So what's your superpower? I said it was the final question and I lied apparently, but you brought it up.
Definitely. I would say over time is I believe in simplicity. So taking really complicated things that sometimes I find people like to explain things in a complicated way because it makes you feel smarter. I'm humble enough to know I am who I am. So if I can take something really complex and distill it to its essence, I always say if you can repeat something back in a fifth grade level type language, which I think is what I'm able to do, people appreciate that. And I do think it moves and progresses companies forward, whether it's in business or in life. So that's probably my superpower.
Yeah, I mean, knowing you, I agree with that because one of the things I think is a great strength of yours is your focus on efficiency and productivity. So let's make it easier, let's make it more focused, let's drive a bigger impact, and let's get everybody on board. And it's nice to hear you express that about yourself.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, great. Mike, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. It's fun for me to get under the hood, if you will, and get to know more about people's leadership perspectives. As much as I've seen you in action and seen you display this, it's really wonderful to hear you express it about yourselves, and I know it'll be helpful to listeners. So thank you so much.
No, thank you for the time. Like I said, it's truly an honor to be here. And thank you as always, Randy, for everything.
Thanks so much for listening to Fulfilling Career Happy Life. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe, follow, rate, and review. Do all the things to show your support for this podcast. It helps other professionals who want to feel more energized about their work again, find us. And if you want to take this thinking further, please follow me on LinkedIn, where I share content on a regular basis. You can also get on my email list by downloading the Career Satisfaction Assessment or through my website. All these links are in the show notes. Thanks again for tuning in. I truly appreciate that you make the time for yourself to listen to the show. See you next week.